On the morning of June 22, 1941, the stillness of the Eastern Front was shattered by the roar of engines and the thunder of artillery. Without a formal declaration of war, Nazi Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest military invasion in history. Over 3 million German soldiers, alongside hundreds of thousands of troops from Italy, Romania, and Hungary, surged across an 180-mile front. They were supported by 3,600 tanks, 2,700 aircraft, and 600,000 vehicles. Their goal was ambitious: the complete destruction of the Soviet Union. Adolf Hitler believed the campaign would take just a few months. The Wehrmacht, he insisted, only needed to kick in the door, and the entire rotten structure of the Soviet regime would collapse. Germany's attack was divided into 3 prongs. Army Group North struck toward Leningrad. Army Group Center advanced on Moscow. And Army Group South, led by Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, pushed into Ukraine and toward the Caucasus, rich in oil. At first, it seemed Hitler was right. The Red Army, reeling from Stalin's purges and caught unprepared, suffered massive losses. Within weeks, hundreds of thousands of Soviet troops were surrounded and captured in vast encirclements. Tanks were destroyed by the thousands. The Luftwaffe dominated the skies. But the Soviet Union did not fall. Stalin, after days of stunned silence, addressed the nation. Factories were evacuated and reassembled beyond the Ural Mountains. Whole cities moved east. The population was mobilized for war. The Germans advanced, but the front grew longer, the resistance fiercer, and the Soviet will unbreakable. By the end of 1941, Hitler's blitzkrieg stalled at the gates of Moscow. In the brutal Russian winter, the Wehrmacht suffered its first major setback. Soviet counterattacks pushed the Germans back. The war Hitler thought would end in months dragged on. In 1942, Hitler refocused. Moscow was no longer the prize. The new objective was oil. Without it, the German war machine could not run. The focus shifted south. The plan was called Fall Blau. The idea was to seize the Caucasus oil fields stretching deep into Soviet territory. But to secure the flanks of this advance, Germany needed control of the Volga River, the lifeline of Soviet industry and transport. There stood Stalingrad, a major industrial city with over 400,000 inhabitants. More than that, it bore the name of the Soviet leader himself, Joseph Stalin. To take it would be to strike at the heart of Soviet pride. For Hitler, this city became an obsession. It must fall. In August 1942, the German Sixth Army under General Friedrich Paulus moved in. Before the troops entered the city, Luftwaffe bombers under General Wolfram von Richthofen unleashed a storm. In a matter of days, Stalingrad was in ruins. Tens of thousands of civilians were killed in the opening bombardment alone. The city burned, its once proud buildings reduced to rubble. But the ruins became an advantage for the defenders. The Soviet 62nd Army, led by General Vasily Chukov, dug in. Streets became killing zones. Buildings turned into fortresses. Sewers served as communication tunnels. The front line was often only meters apart, constantly shifting. The battle soon turned into one of the most brutal urban fights in history. Soviet troops operated under Order No. 227, not one step back. Retreat was punishable by death. The entire city became a battlefield. Soldiers fought room by room, stairwell by stairwell. The tractor factory, the grain elevator, the railway station, each was captured and recaptured, sometimes multiple times a day. One Soviet sniper, Vasily Zaitsev, became a legend. In the rubble of the city, he stalked German officers and gunners, claiming over 225 confirmed kills. Soviet propaganda turned him into a symbol of resistance. The Germans came close to victory. By October, 90% of Stalingrad was in German hands. But the last Soviet defenders held out near the riverbank, dug into cellars and bunkers. Supplies were ferried across the Volga under constant fire. Unknown to the Germans, the Red Army was preparing a trap. On November 19, 1942, the Soviets launched Operation Uranus. Over 1 million Red Army troops, supported by 900 tanks and 14,000 artillery pieces, smashed into the flanks of the German Sixth Army. These flanks were held not by elite German troops, but by under-equipped Romanian, Hungarian, and Italian forces. In just 4 days, the Soviets achieved a complete encirclement. The German Sixth Army was trapped. Inside the so-called Kessel, or cauldron, were 290,000 Axis troops. Food was scarce. Ammunition limited. The winter of 1942-43 would be one of the coldest of the century. Paulus asked Hitler for permission to break out. The answer was no. Hitler ordered him to stand firm. He believed the Luftwaffe could resupply the army by air. It was a fantasy. To survive, the encircled troops needed 700 tons of supplies per day. The Luftwaffe managed, at best, 100 to 150 tons. Many flights never made it. Others dropped supplies into Soviet hands by mistake. In December, Field Marshal Erich von Manstein attempted a relief Operation Winterstorm. His forces advanced, but never reached the encircled Sixth Army. The Soviet grip held. Conditions inside the pocket worsened. Men froze in their trenches. Horses were slaughtered for meat. Medical supplies ran out. Starvation, disease, and desperation ruled. By January 1943, the Sixth Army was collapsing. On January 30th, Hitler made Paulus a field marshal, a not-so-subtle reminder that no German field marshal had ever been captured alive. But Paulus did not commit suicide. On January 31st, he surrendered the southern pocket. The northern group held out a few more days. On February 2, 1943, the battle was over. Of the 290,000 Axis soldiers who had been trapped in Stalingrad, fewer than 6,000 would ever return from Soviet captivity. The Soviet victory at Stalingrad was more than a battlefield triumph. It was a psychological turning point. The German aura of invincibility was broken. For the first time, Hitler's ambitions were not just challenged but crushed. The cost, however, was staggering. The Axis powers lost over 800,000 men in the campaign, including dead, wounded, missing, and captured. The Soviet Union paid an even heavier price, more than 1.1 million casualties, including hundreds of thousands of civilians and soldiers alike. Yet, the Soviet flag flew once more over the ruins. Stalingrad had been reduced to ashes. But out of those ashes rose the momentum of the Red Army, driving westward, liberating city after city, until they would one day reach Berlin. Today, the city is called Volgograd. Its people remember. Its hills still whisper the memories of the fallen. The Mame of Kurgan stands as a memorial to sacrifice. Crowned by the towering statue, the motherland calls. The Battle of Stalingrad lasted 200 days, from August 23, 1942, to February 2, 1943. It was not just a battle for a city. It was a battle for the future. In the frozen ruins along the Volga, the tide of the Second World War began to turn.